Welcome to Breaking the Silence of Design, a bi-monthly vodcast designed to discuss the issues of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in the built environment. My name is Karen Compton, principal of A3K Consulting and co-host.
And I'm Gabrielle Bullock, Director of Global Diversity with Perkins & Will, and your other co-host. And today, we take questions. And the questions are becoming more and more difficult to answer, but we will do our best.
We're going to do our best. So here's the first one. My firm is a large national architectural practice that, when following the murder of George Floyd, formed a DEI committee to assess justice and equity within the firm. After getting input from the committee, the firm leadership disbanded the committee and told us they no longer would pay for our time to meet. They said they were going to focus on issues specifically related to Asian hate. Many of us felt silenced. We appealed to HR, but they would not take up the issue. What are your thoughts?
Ooh, I have lots of thoughts.
Yeah, right?
One, clearly this was a moment for this particular firm and leadership group. I think it was a knee-jerk reaction to keep up with, have to take action, make a statement, but clearly they haven't demonstrated
real commitment,
an interest and commitment for it to be to be a movement. So that's one thing. The second thing that struck me was they were no longer going to focus on DE&I, but they were going to focus on Asian hate.
Yeah.
So I ask you, what's the difference?
Yeah.
And as long as we consider black and brown issues
separately
as DE&I and everything else is part of culture, whatever, then we've missed the boat.
Yeah.
The issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion in firms in our profession is a cultural issue, and it covers everything from disability to gender, race,
access,
all of it. And if we don't stop, parsing it out by race and everything, then we will continue to have this culture gap.
I think choosing to only focus on issues related to Asian hate really continues to reinforce separatism.
Yes.
It by accident, intentionally, not sure, chooses sides and places more value, in my opinion, on one group than another. So I think that's a complete travesty. The bigger issue to me in here, and I think we should just call it what it is this was completely optical allyship. This was, I'm going to be an ally and I want to look like I'm supporting, but I'm really not committed. And I think when we first sat down to have this conversation, you said some will come along and some will not. Exactly. And this is clearly a firm that has chosen not to come along. And at some point, you might just have to make a decision and say, is this really the place for me? I mean, just that's kind of my perspective on it.
That's exactly right. I totally agree.
Okay. What's the next one?
Next one is you.
Okay. Our firm recently developed a robust DEI committee that has been doing good work, identifying issues and developing solutions to address DE&I. Our leadership had been supportive, but then they told us that the committee needed to, quote, pause the DEI initiative and focus on getting new work because our backlog was down. How do we construct a business case for our continued work to build business and impact firm culture?
Okay, I have some thoughts on that.
I know you do.
So it's not uncommon for DE&I initiatives, committee work, whatever, to become a casualty in a downturn or when work is slow. It's traditionally what happens if you're not careful. So I'm not surprised. I would say that the business case you can make is that this is not something that, this is something that young people, the next generation, recent graduates, they've become advocates, activists. They are interested in social equity. They want to be in firms that address and engage everybody for an inclusive environment. So retention and recruitment are the best business case. The other part of the business case is depending on what kind of work you do. If you're doing single family homes,
May not make a
probably
difference.
this is not going to work.
Right.
But our clients are grappling with the same issues, and they want teams and firms that that have a philosophy and a commitment around advancing Jedi, if
Because
you will.
they see how it impacts their work.
Yes, and they're being challenged by their own constituents.
Yeah.
Right? Higher ed institutions are being challenged by their students. Cities are being challenged by their
Stakeholders.
What are you going to do to make this community better? And so it's gaining traction, hopefully more than a moment. And
Right.
so I'm a little surprised that the business case is not obvious.
There were a couple things about this that struck me when we talked. One was the idea that the company formed a DEI initiative, and I think you made the comment that as long as it remains an initiative, as opposed to being part of the firm's core value, it's transitory.
Yes.
It can be disbanded at any given point in time.
And it can be optional.
And it can be optional.
So my advice would be, if you're really serious about embracing a more diverse, inclusive, and engaged, equitable culture and profession, then establish it as a core value. And by doing that, you are committing the entire organization to fulfill that obligation. And it must have a leader with power, a leader that can drive it throughout the organization with others, the committee or whoever. But I think without a leader, it will remain fragile.
I think the other problem that I see here is that you're saying one thing and doing another. You're saying I'm committed to DEI, but it is conditional.
I'm committed as long as I
As long as I have work, and if I don't have work, we're not going to meet that condition's not being met. We're not going to do it, and that doesn't happen with other aspects of business. So why should it happen with DE&I?
Right. Well, I think back to our initial reactions to this, the fundamental issue is that this organization does not seem really committed.
Yeah.
To DE&I.
And I can only imagine how that would make the employees feel.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, the next one is yours.
Okay. It seems as though we, our firm, are caught between what the data says about people of color in their profession, statistics, etc., and action on the issues of DE&I. Do you have any thoughts around how a mid-level professional can move us along?
So much like you, I have lots of thoughts. I think data, as a numbers wonk, as an analyst, I love data and information because it defines a baseline. But I have noticed that some individuals use the lack of data or not having sufficient data as an excuse for not making a move, as opposed to saying, okay, we know it's low, whatever low happens to be, let's just move forward.
And by low, you mean low number of
diverse participants within the organization. You can just kind of do a visual survey. We know that it's lower than what we would like it to be. So without having to get caught on the data, somebody specifically checking a box and saying, I am Black, or I am, Asian American and I identify as, I think you can still move forward in a meaningful way. As a mid-level professional, I do think you would probably need to find an ally in a senior leader who has both voice and agency to be able to support this dialogue moving forward, and who can really make impact. If you're a mid-level professional and don't feel that you have the gravitas or the seat at the table to do that, I would say that's probably your first point of departure, is to get another ally to come along with you.
I would agree, particularly if there's some pushback or some resistance, or I need the data before I can move forward. The other cautionary tale, I would say, if you're early in your career, and I don't know what mid-level means necessarily, but I would caution us not to take on the burden of leading diversity initiatives within organizations very early in our career. This is a daunting task. It takes a lot of time, and we're architects and designers first. So let's be that, and let's encourage organizations to find the right people. Now, I did it when it was way past mid-career, and it was something that I wanted to do. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
I think that's a really good point, because sometimes people end up getting pigeonholed as well.
That's right.
So if you're younger or earlier in your profession or in your career, people might just end up pigeonholing an individual and saying, well, you only exclusively work on issues related to that, and then that stunts growth and advancement.
Right.
Now, the one other thing that I thought was kind of interesting, you and I talked a little bit about where do people go to get data and information. And there's lots of sources, right? So what are some of the ones that you commonly think of?
So there's the AIA data.
Okay.
They track all the demographics within AIA. There's Kendall Nicholson's
Dr. Kenneth Nicholson's
Dr. Kenneth Nicholson with the Association of Collegiate
Schools of Architecture.
Great research and data there. And also NOMA is a good national organization of minority architects, is a good resource. They currently track and hold the Directory of African Americans in this country.
Okay, so those are some really good starting points.
African American architects.
Okay. So I have the next question too. How do you see the work of human resources and the work of a DEI committee balancing each other in a meaningful way? Our human resources staff already look at their work through a DEI lens. So how can we make sure that the work of our committee is complementary to the steps that HR takes?
I think HR is definitely a partner, as is the head of marketing, as is, the ops director, managing director, and all that. I do think that the committee has different work. The work of how is DE&I showing up in our team dynamics on our projects? How is it showing up in our work? So I think tackling and strategizing around how to explore equity, diversity, and inclusion within the work that we do, and HR can't do that, right?
Most of the
design professionals who are hopefully part of this committee are the ones that can really push that agenda.
Most of the time I have found that HR within architecture is largely led by a person who's not an architect. While that is sometimes the case, in other words, they're onboarding people and hiring people, but sometimes a true HR professional is somebody who has no working knowledge or understanding of the dynamics of practice. So while they can focus on, let's say, recruitment strategy or retention strategy through a DEI lens, they don't necessarily have the language or the understanding of how does a project actually come together? How does the team dynamic come together? How do we elicit or do we allow other voices and perspectives to be heard? And so I think HR plays, like you said, a role as a partner, but do you think they should lead?
My personal opinion is that no.
Yeah.
But as I said, they could co-lead.
Yeah.
They can be a partner, an advisor. I think when it is couched, and this is nothing against the human resources profession, but if many see it as compliance only,
that's a good point.
Then they're not gonna think outside the box.
Yeah.
They're not gonna feel comfortable. Now this is not a categorical comment about all HR, but I do think that is the one difference that I would be cautious of, is compliance versus really transformation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. because oftentimes we do kind of go down a compliance, kind of check the box, and I hadn't really thought about that. Okay.
Ready for the next one?
I am, I guess.
I was elected as a chair of our DE&I committee in its first year as a white woman. How can I ensure that I am an agent for change while also staying aware of my white, cisgender privilege?
I think we both agree. You just did.
Exactly.
You literally just did. This is such a great question, but the individual who asked it has such great awareness, self-awareness, that they are operating not only as a woman, a privileged white woman, and really fully acknowledges that and says it. So,
and I would imagine because this individual appears to be aware, it's part of the reason why she was probably identified as a potential leader. I think maintaining that awareness and being vulnerable and being curious about those who are not as privileged to inform your work as a change agent is absolutely critical.
Yeah. And keep asking questions. Continually ask for other perspectives. I think is really critically important because you have such a great sense of self-awareness and very cognizant about it clearly, to continue to ask other people who are not necessarily white and cisgendered what is their perspective or their lived experience will continue to shape the work that you do as head of your DEI committee.
And I applaud this woman. Recently I've been thinking about what are you going to do with your seat at the table?
Yeah.
So for those of us out there that have a seat at the table, that have some power, what are you going to do with it? And I appreciate this person's commitment to being vulnerable. She clearly has taken a risk.
Yeah.
And doing something with her seat at the table.
And I really appreciate it. Anyway, those were actually a little bit difficult today.
Yes, they were, but gives us a lot to think about.
We made it. And I don't think it's too late. We have some others that we're going to tackle in future episodes. But I want to thank you for joining us today. Thank you very much to our founding partner, IBI Group, to DLR Group for hosting us today, and to all of our partners on this journey of difficult conversations.
It's not too late to join us in our conversation. You can subscribe to YouTube, follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.